and it is live.
Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to Freetown Farm. We are here on a really special day to talk to you about pollinators and why they're so important and what you can do on their behalf. Today is the 1-year anniversary of when the Community Ecology Institute was able to purchase this farmland and protect it from ever being developed. We are on 6.5 acres of land that was farmed organically for 40 years, and now we are 1 year into transforming it into a community learning farm. And we have a lot of different things happening across the property. And one of the things that's really exciting and I think is really symbolic of everything that's happening here is the fact that we're partnering with Howard County Beekeepers Association to have the farm be an out yard for beehives and for bees. And we were just noticing today the parallels between how busy the bees are and how busy our volunteers are out here working to grow food and take care of the ecosystem. So we're excited to show you what we're doing here with bees. And in partnership with the Beekeepers Association, it's me and David here that are going to share their deep knowledge about bees with us, and then we're going to take a short walk over to our pollinator garden and talk to you about how you can create a habitat for bees and other pollinators wherever you may live. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Sarah. So hey everybody, so I'm David and this is Dean. We're both members of the Howard County Beekeepers Association. We're standing in front of the colony, which we're not supposed to do. You can see the bees kind of going in and out. This is kind of their flight path, so for us, it's better for us to stand back because we're blocking the bees, so hopefully this will hit. We're going to talk to you a little bit about pollinators. Honeybees are one of the pollinators in the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland has over 400 pollinators. Bees specifically, there's actually more like 700 different pollinators. So we have a lot of native bees in Maryland, but most of the bees by count are honeybees, and that's because they form these large colonies with 30 to 60,000 bees, and solitary native bees, there's maybe 2 or 3 or 4, not anywhere near the number. So when we talk about pollination, the numbers of bees makes a big difference, just because there's so many more to go out and pollinate, and they are busy on this farm pollinating the flowers and the vegetables and the fruits. They're just really good. So Dean, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, well, honeybees are a very important pollinator for us, and from a food source, they're important because we can manage honeybees. Many of the other pollinators will come and pollinate our plants or our vegetable gardens and so on, but we can't manage them. And so the nice thing about honeybees is we could actually pick this hive up and take it to where we need the pollination to happen, and that happens all over the country with great big farms and almond groves and so on. And so they're very, very important from a food perspective for us. All the pollinators are important, but from food, they're really important for us.
Yep, that's true. So just for those of you, you've probably heard the statistic that about 1/3 of our food is pollinated by pollinators. And that's true, but a more important statistic is about almost 70% of the food that we like most. So the things that we eat most are pollinated by pollinators. So if you think of a world without pollinators, you're going to give up about 70% of the things you like to eat every day. And you would think, oh, it's just fruits and vegetables. I don't really like my vegetables that much. But you know, there was a guy that went and took to McDonald's and took a Big Mac and said, okay, how much of the Big Mac would be around if pollinators weren't here? And it turns out about the only thing that would be left would be the beef patty.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to have a bun, you're going to have pickles, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, none of that stuff, because that all has foundation with pollinators, all those fruits and vegetables that go into something like a Big Mac. So it's not just the foods that are really good for you, but some of the things that we probably shouldn't eat, but we like to eat. And so it's really important that we keep pollinators around. One of the best things you can do, and you'll see some of the pollinator gardens here in a few minutes, is really try to plant native pollinator plants. There's all kinds of websites. If you Google native pollinator plants Maryland, you'll find all kinds of websites. You'll find actual nurseries that sell native pollinator plants. And they're not hybrids, because some of the hybrid plants don't really offer much for pollinators. So do a little bit of research, and one of the things you'll find is a lot of the pollinator plants, especially a lot of the natives, are really easy to grow. They're not fussy about the dirt. They're not really that fussy about full sun, and you really don't have to do much. They're almost just like weeds. And so they'll just grow, and the pollinators will love it. And you'll have all kinds of pollinators in your garden, and they'll make, if you have fruits and vegetables, if you have any sort of fruit and vegetable garden, your yields will go way up. You'll be giving away fruits and vegetables because you'll have so much because of the pollen. So we're going to dig into this colony in a minute. Go ahead, Dean.
I'm going to say, as the outreach coordinator and the out-yard coordinator with Howard County Beekeepers, I'm always asked, what can I do to help with, the honeybees and other pollinators. And as Dave said, planting a pollinator garden is a good way to do that. Another way to do it is look at maybe becoming a beekeeper. A lot of people don't want to take that step. So one of the things I mentioned, I'm the out-yard coordinator for Howard County Beekeepers. If you might have a piece of property where you'd like to have bees, you can contact your local beekeeper association and ask them if they have any beekeepers that would like to put hives, colonies on your property as an out-yard. And so that's a way that you can support it. So you can have bees on your property, they can pollinate your garden, your flowers and trees, but you don't have to maintain it. Another experienced beekeeper will come on, you can make the arrangements with them, but they'll come on your property and maintain the bees on your property, much like we're doing here at the farm here. And so that's always a possibility for those that might like to have bees on their property, but don't want to have to manage it themselves.
All right, I'm going to show you some stuff that's going on in this colony. So this is some brand new comb that they're building. So they build beeswax out of honey. It takes about 7 pounds of honey to make a pound of beeswax. But this beeswax that you're looking at right here is probably a fraction of a pound. They are so efficient. They build all these 6-sided cells. And what you're seeing in the middle here is capped brood. So that's brood, those are babies. All insects go through metamorphosis, and with honeybees, they go through metamorphosis underneath these cappings. So they will emerge as an adult bee from under that capping, and it takes 3 weeks for a worker. And all the bees you're looking at right now are worker bees. They're all females. So let me see if I can find, we're going to see if we can find a queen for you to see. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. So there's only one queen in the colony, but there's thousands of daughters, the workers. You can see here, if you look really closely, some different size of cells. So these are smaller ones, and those are called worker cells. These are much larger, and these are for drones, and drones are the males. There's only a few thousand drones in a colony, even a big colony. But the drones go out and mate with the virgin queens. That's their only job. The workers do everything else. They feed the brood, they rear the brood, they take care of the queen, they build the comb, they bring in all the food, whether it's pollen or nectar, and we'll try to show you some of that. Alright, so we have some pollen and some nectar on this thing. Chilling. Trying to make sure I don't have a queen on here before we get too busy. So up here in this corner, we saw some capped brood before. This is capped honey. You see a very thin layer of wax on the top. And then if you look down in these cells, you see some wet stuff. That's honey that's not quite cured yet. They dry it back to about 18% moisture. And once it's that dry and they cap it, it can last forever. They found honey in pots in pyramids that's over 5,000 years old, and it was perfectly good. So here's a lot of pollen. If you look down here, you'll see different colors, and that's pollen that they brought in from different sources, and you really want to see all those different colors. So there's some yellows and grays and greens and oranges, and that means they're getting pollen from a lot of different plant sources, which is really healthy for them. It's like eating a lot of good different kinds of vegetables. So eating your carrots and your broccoli and your cauliflower, and so it's really good for rearing strong brood. She's not large, she's not a huge. Okay, so now we're just going to kind of do a search to see if we can find the queen. Yeah, we've got some brood on here, some food, there's some pollen, a little bit of nectar. Oops, sorry girl. They actually store most of their nectar up in the top box, and we're in the bottom box, so we're not seeing a lot of the honey. In the wild, in a tree, they store their honey up at the very top of the comb. We've got a young bee emerging right here. If you can see her head and her antennae, they come out head first, so you can kind of see a little hole there in the cap. You can see her moving around. It'll take her a minute or two to break through and to come out. And when she emerges, she'll look more like this bee right here. They're very fuzzy. They kind of have fuzz around their eyes. And that's just what a new bee looks like until she's been out for a couple days. Okay, I'm not seeing the queen on here. She's bigger than the workers. She's got a whole abdomen full of eggs, so her abdomen is much longer than a worker bee. Some queens don't like to be found, and they're pretty sneaky about staying out of bees. They move quickly, and then they just kind of hide. This queen I haven't had for too long, so I'm not sure exactly whether she's that type of queen or not, but maybe. Alright, probably moved up, and we've been in this box for a little bit longer than we should. Here's a drone though, I'll show you a drone. Oops, he just flew away. You gonna come back? Alright, he just flew off. See if I can find you another drone. There aren't that many in here. So here's one. He's not a particularly large one. He's probably a juvenile. He's this guy here. So you can see he's kind of fatter than his sister. And he's got really big eyes. I don't know if you can see his eyes, but they go all the way to the top of his head. So this is him here. And so he's big like a queen. His abdomen isn't as long. It's kind of blunt on the end because they don't have a stinger. So drones can't sting, but they have big eyes so they can spot the virgin queens in the mating yard. All right, do you have any questions about honeybees?
Yes, I do. I have a list. My first question is, can you explain the parts of the hive and how it's similar to a natural living space for the bees?
Yep. So the bottom box is what we call a brood box,
Okay.
and that's typically where the will be located, and she will lay her eggs in the bottom of the box. They'll also have honey on the frames where they lay the brood, so that they have easy access to honey and pollen to feed the brood. But that's always towards the bottom of the hive. We use a queen excluder. I'm going to set this back a little bit. We use a queen excluder oftentimes between the bottom box, the bottom boxes, so the brood boxes, and the upper boxes to keep the queen down there. Sometimes she slips through or slips by it, but usually it keeps the queen down there so that all the brood, all the she's laying, will all be down in the lower boxes.
Okay.
And then in the upper boxes above the queen excluder are what we call honey seekers. And so the workers can fit through the queen excluder and go up and deposit their nectar, and that's where they make the honey, the honey sweet. And so they'll use that themselves in the wintertime to feed, but the beekeepers will also extract that honey for our purposes.
Okay.
So, and that fits pretty much if you were to have it used in a tree. The queen and the brood are going to be towards the bottom of the space that they have inside the tree, and the honeysuckers are going to be up towards the top.
So naturally they kind of organize like that in that formation.
Yeah, and then we try and manage them in a similar kind of way, but they're wild creatures. Sometimes they decide they're not going to be managed by us the way we want them to be, and sometimes you'll have a hive that just isn't going to organize that way. But we do try to manage it the same way we think.
Awesome. Wow. My next question is, how do they communicate with each other and with the queen and with this other member, the drones? Like, how is it that they communicate?
Well, so some of the communication is exactly how they move. And so the bees, when they come back to the hive, when they've been out foraging, they actually will do a bit of a dance. And how they move, how they wiggle, how they turn, all communicates to the other bees, the other foragers, where they just were successfully collecting pollen and nectar, and that the bees will know how far to go out and how far to go out to the right or to the left of where the colony is, and so they communicate a lot with the physical movement of the body. Dave, what other ways do they
communicate a lot
Can you
with
project a little bit more?
smell. So we call them pheromones, but they're actually scents that they give off. So one of the things that the ways that the drones find the queen is because the queen gives off a scent. And the drones can smell it from miles away and actually fly to an area where those queens are. There's also some scents like the come home scent that the workers will give to tell their sisters this is where home is, and then that's where they'll go. We use that scent to actually capture swarms. So when a colony swarms, we put up a beehive and we put that scent, and then it attracts the bees to that box so that we can catch the swarm. So there's, again, we're kind of working with their biology and their kind of how they do things to kind of work hand in hand with them.
Okay.
You know, they could go find a bee tree, but their odds of survival at a bee tree is less than if you caught them and managed them.
Oh, so you're taking them, I guess, from their, or you're attracting them from their natural environment and then kind of recruiting them?
So in a sense, bees will swarm from the hives where we're raising them for a number of reasons. Sometimes they get on forage,
I see.
Okay, she's on the bottom rail here. She's right here. See the long abdomen on her? So this is her. Her wings look short because her abdomen is so long. And her abdomen is so long partly because it's loaded with eggs. She can lay 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day. She is a brood machine. But part of it's so that she can stick it down in that cell and pop an egg right in the center. But that's the queen, and that's the only queen in this colony of all these thousands of bees. And these are all her daughters, every one of them.
And that 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day relates to, in her lifetime, 3 to 5 million eggs lay in her lifetime from the single time that she goes out to mate with multiple drones.
Can you project a little bit more? A little louder.
So in single time, she'll go out and mate with multiple drones early on in her life, but she will collect enough material to make and to lay 3.5 million eggs through her lifetime. Which is quite good. Back to your earlier question about the swarms and tracking them. So bees will swarm from a hive where we're managing them for a number of different reasons. There may not be enough forage, enough food for them in the area, and they decide they're going to go find someplace better. But more often than not, it's because we as beekeepers haven't done a really good job of making sure they have adequate space in the hive. So when they figure out that they're starting to consume all the space, they're filling it with brood, they're filling it with honey, then they decide, well, we need to go find another place to live. So the colony will raise some new queens. They'll lay some new eggs for queens to raise them. And about the time that they're getting ready to hatch, the existing queens and a number of the bees will leave the colony. And quite often they'll swarm up into a tree, and they'll stay there for a little while they've got scouts around looking for another place for them to live. So as beekeepers, we try and catch the swarms, and we put them back into another colony. We don't put them back to where they left, because they would leave again, but we put them back into another hive to raise another colony. They can find a place to live in suburban communities. They often end up in the walls of houses. They'll find a little place to get into in the basement walls of the house, and they'll set up a really nice colony where they'll live there for years with tens of thousands of bees in their walls. But they don't do quite so well, trying to find a place out in nature. Honeybees, as we know them, are not native to the United States. They were brought here in the early 1600s, and so
From Europe?
From England.
Oh, okay.
And so the ones that you see that are out in nature have escaped, if you will, and swarmed from managed hives to beekeepers and farmers over the years.
So do bees ever go out on their own as individuals and kind of strike out on their own and find other colonies? I'm curious.
Not as individuals.
Not as okay.
They would always leave with a swarm and with a queen, and when the bees, the workers that leave with her, it might be just a few thousand. I've actually caught swarms that were as many as 40 or 45,000 bees that left a big colony. And so she always goes with a swarm of bees, worker bees, to take care of her and to manage the hive.
Okay, and how small can that swarm be?
I've seen them as small as 5,000. In fact, I caught one.
Oh.
Actually, they caught themselves. But a few weeks ago on my property, I had a swarm leave one of my hives and set up in some boxes that I had just not, that were just set aside. They actually went into the box themselves, and that was a small swarm. It was probably about 5,000 bees.
Wow, okay.
So it was pretty small.
And the male bees, the drones, do they travel with the swarm too, or is it mostly just the queen and the females?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Dave, do the drones travel with the swarm, or do they hang back at the hive?
They do. So some of the drones do move with the swarm. So there's some great debate as to how they choose the bees, but it's usually about 50 to 60% of the colony, bees in the colony, will go with the mother queen. And it's a form of colony reproduction. So we don't understand that because we don't reproduce that way, but this is the way a lot of insects reproduce. For honeybees, we call it their prime directive. So every colony that we set up, the first thing they do is start to set the groundwork for swarming. And so what they want to do is split that colony in half, because then that means 2 colonies instead of 1.
Okay.
So swarming is part of their nature. As beekeepers, we're not super thrilled about it because we lose half of our bees and the queen. But we can manage it. There's ways to manage it. One of them is to do what we call artificial swarms, where when we see a colony getting really strong, we say, okay, well, I'm going to take the queen and some of the bees and move them someplace else. So it's just like they swarm, except we manage it.
Okay.
And then this colony doesn't have a queen, and then they'll rear a new queen, just like the queenless colony that had after the swarm.
So the colony that is going to rear a new queen, is there an individual that is genetically predisposed to becoming a queen, or do they develop that, or do they all have the potential to become queen?
Great question. The answer is you are what you eat. So all of you that don't like to eat your yucky vegetables need to listen, because the difference between a worker bee, which we just saw a bunch of, and a queen is what you eat. The egg is exactly the same. It's a fertilized egg. And when they go queenless, then the worker bees will feed them a special diet. It's called royal jelly. And royal jelly will, when you feed an egg royal jelly, it will turn into a queen.
And how do they choose the queen out of all of the individuals?
Well, that's a good question too. There's been some debate about that. The current thinking is that they try to be very diverse with their choice. So I don't know if Dean mentioned it, but when a virgin queen goes out to mate, she mates with on average 15 different drones. So she brings in a lot of different genetic material. And as she lays eggs, she mixes it up. So she might lay, half a dozen eggs from this drone and half a dozen eggs from that drone. And so there's a lot of diversity inside this colony. That's why you see different colored bees. Some are yellow, some are darker colors, gray. Because they have different fathers. And so right now what people believe is when they go to choose, because they'll make multiple queens.
Okay.
They'll say, okay, we want a queen from this genetic material, we want one from this one, so they choose diversity. And then when all these queens emerge, there might be a dozen of them in there, generally they fight to the death, but it's survival of the fittest. So whichever is the strongest queen will prevail, and of course then the assumption is the strongest, so that's the genetic material, so she should head to the next colony.
Okay.
So that's really how it works, and then she's got to go out and get mated, just like her mother did, and come back and start laying eggs and starting a colony.
Oh.
So it's a pretty scary proposition when you think about it, because these virgin queens are going out maybe 2 or 3 times on these mating flights. They go 3 to 5 miles away, and they're mating with all these drones and then trying to make it back. And it really seems like, well, what are the odds that they're all going to make it back? And they don't all make it back, but the vast majority, probably 80% plus, make it back. And it's really phenomenal that they can do that. So.
Amazing. How do they select the specific drones that they mate with? Is there a sexual dimorphism with
That's a really good question.
the bees?
It's a survival thing. So there are these things called drone congregation areas, and they're usually up against the edge of woods in kind of an open area. And these drones, they'll come out at about 10 a.m. once they mature, about 15 days after they emerge, then they're mature. And they'll come out at about 10 o'clock after they've had a nice leisurely breakfast being fed by the workers. And they'll go fly 3 to 5 miles away to these drone congregation areas. And it looks kind of like a racetrack. They just kind of do this lazy loop around, maybe 50 to 75 feet up in the air. And they're just waiting for queens to come.
Okay.
And they do that until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and they get tired. And they say, I'd like to have a beer, and they come back, and the workers feed them, and then they do it all over the next day. But what happens when a virgin queen comes out, is she comes out, and she puts her turbo on, and she flies as fast as she can around that loop. And these drones are chasing her. And only the fast, the most fittest drones are going to catch her. And so that's the survival part of it. So the weak ones will not catch her. That could be because of genetics. But the superior, strong ones are going to catch up with her because she's moving so fast. So that's really the selection. That's how the selection happens.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The drones only ever get a chance to mate once.
Okay.
The queen, once they mate, they'll die. Just as bees, when they sting you, they almost always die because the stinger pulls out of their abdomen and they die. So the same kind of thing happens with the drones. Once they mate, they're done for. So they get one chance at being a father.
And is that the same case with the worker bees? That as soon as they sting you as well, they also die? Okay.
The workers, it is possible, depending upon how they sting you or what they're stinging. If the flesh that the stinger has gone into is soft, and they can pull it out, then they might be able to sting you again. But the human skin is pretty tough, and so once it penetrates, the stinger is shaped like a barb, like a fishing hook, and so once it goes in, it doesn't pull out. And so when the bee pulls away, or when we reflexively brush it away, the stinger stays behind, and the bee dies.
And what exactly is in the stinger that causes that response?
It's a venom.
It's a venom. Okay.
And it's different than the venom that you would find in almost every other bee. They all have their own venom, and it reacts differently, but it is toxic. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, there's proteins and different things in there, but the composition of venoms, they have these antihistamines and histamines and all kinds of different things that cause usually when you get stung at the site, you'll have some swelling because of the sting. Of course, you feel the pain. There have been people that have ranked the pain of different stings, and honeybees are not at the top, as far as the most painful, but they're not at the bottom either. We talked earlier about a lot of the native bees, and most of the native bees can sting as well, but they're not as likely to sting. Honeybees only sting defensively, same thing as other bees. Honeybees obviously have something to protect here. They might have 50, 60, 100 pounds of honey on there, and there's a lot of other creatures, including man, that would like to have some of that. And so they're defending this food source that they need to get through the winter. Solitary bees, these native bees, they have a nest, but it's usually a little hole in the ground or in a piece of wood. And so they're not usually defending when they're pollinating. They're out, gathering nectar and they're foraging. They're not defending anything, so it's very unlikely that they would sting. And they don't have a very strong sting because they don't have to defend like a honeybee does. So wasps and hornets have much stronger stings than honeybees. And as Dean was talking about, they don't have barbed stingers, so they can sting and sting and sting and sting the same bee or the same wasp. So many times when we hear people getting stung by bees, it's probably yellow jackets. It's very similar to honeybees. Yellow jackets, the big difference is that their legs are yellow, and honeybees' legs are black. So if you're ever not sure, look at the legs. On the yellow jackets, they're going to be yellow. That's easy to remember. Any other questions?
Yes. What are the honeybees' natural predators, if there are any? And what are the interactions like with the natural predators and the bees, especially considering that there is a hive and probably just one individual or maybe under a few natural predators that are hunting them?
Sure. So there are some predators that are larger than the bees significantly, like bears. You always hear about bears. Bears like honey, but they also like to eat the brood. That's the protein source. So a bear will decimate the colony. They'll go in and knock it over and eat everything that they can and probably kill most of the bees. But things like raccoons and skunks and possums, they like to eat bees too. We lose colonies every year because of small animals like mice. They get into colonies sometimes, they make a huge mess making a nest, and sometimes they can kill a colony. Voles, we lost several colonies over the last few years to voles. Voles like to eat the heads off of bees. So they'll take up residence in a colony, they can squeeze through the entrance. So they're tiny, but they'll go in and just start picking off the bees, and in the wintertime the bees can't defend themselves that well because it's cold and they're in a cluster, so they're not that active. And then there's things like wax moths and hive beetles, and these are pests. These are other pests that go in and cause havoc in the colonies. They like to feed, they lay their eggs in the comb and in the honey and they ruin it. So those can kill colonies, but strong colonies can usually defend against that. The biggest thing that some people have heard about are the mites. So the varroa mite is a small mite that came from Asia. It looks kind of like a tick on a bee, but it would be about the size of a dinner plate on us. So that's how big it is. And it vectors all kinds of viruses into the bee because it actually, attaches to the bee and kind of sucks fluid and fat and stuff out of the bee. So it can inject all kinds of viruses, and that's probably the worst thing that we deal with right now. Mostly we try to treat against the mites, so we try to use treatments that kill the mites but don't kill the bees. Some of us, I work on trying to have bees that can actually defend themselves against the mites, but it's tough because the mites have only been here for about 35 years and the bees just haven't adapted to them yet. So I try to get bees that have shown promise and trying to defend themselves against the mites. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. It's just part of survival. So that's probably the biggest thing, and that's when people heard over the years, the bees are in trouble. It's mostly the varroa mite that's the big problem. So think about ticks. It's like a big fat tick on the bees.
As a beekeeper, if we do nothing in our hive to protect it from mice, whether we use genetics, like drug, or we use different chemicals that kill the mice or don't kill the bees, if we don't treat them, if we don't manage that at all, we're probably going to lose that hive by the end of the year. In my experience, it's something that about 75 to 80% of the hive by the end of the year we will lose if we're not treating it, if we're not managing the mice. The rest of the things, they tend to take care of themselves, but mice, if you're not taking care of them, if you're not helping your bees with that, then you're probably going to lose that colony.
One of the biggest things, there's all kinds of studies that have been done on forage, really good food sources for colonies. And one of the things that they found is that colonies that have really good diverse food sources fairly close by to the colonies have a better chance of surviving, the varroa and other, stressors like that that are in the colonies. And it's just because they're so well nourished, their nutrition is so good. And so that kind of takes us full circle back to the beginning of our discussion where, if you have a garden, if you have
flowers or plants, try to plant things that are good for pollinators, because then they get that good diverse diet. Try to encourage, and Howard County is great because it's a bee city. The whole county is a bee city, which means they're really trying to help pollinators. And so like along the highways, along the roads, they let the natural plants grow that flower, and those are really good for the pollinators. If you have neighbors and you have a buffer between your houses, let that, grow wild. Don't mow it. Lawns are the worst thing for pollinators unless they're loaded with white clover.
Mm-hmm.
So white clover is great. It's the best thing to put on your lawn, and all the pollinators can get nectar and pollen from them, so that's a really good thing to put down. But just try to be creative. Again, the websites, there's a lot of good information out there. Our website is HOCOBA.com. HOCO for Howard County, BA for Beekeepers Association.com. And if you go on HOCOBA.com, you will find all kinds of links to all kinds of plantings and pollinator things, all kinds of videos. There's a kind of a forum in there to ask questions. There's all the information about our speakers every month. There's information about taking the beginner beekeeper courses. Just all kinds of information. All of our outreach events are listed there. So that's a really good one. So HOCOBA, HOCOBA.com. But if you Google anything to do with pollinators or honeybees, you're going to probably find a lot of good resources.
Awesome. So would you consider the natural threat of the mites to be more of a present danger than, I guess, the manufactured threat of the collateral damage that is caused by insecticides, and just that being a danger to bees?
Right now it seems to be. So one of the things about insects in general is that they have a really good system to kind of clean out those kinds of toxins. They have a really good way of doing that. It's one of the reasons we hear about, it's really hard to get rid of ants. It's really hard to, because insects in general have a really good process internally to kind of separate out these toxins. I'm not saying that it doesn't hurt them, because it does, but that's a lesser problem than these mites. And until the bees kind of figure these mites out, then that's going to be the bigger problem, I think. But it's like anything else. If you have too many stressors, if there's a lot of pesticides, if there's not very good forage, not very good nectar and pollen sources, those all stress the bees, and then the mite is more deadly because they're already stressed.
Okay.
So if we can remove those stresses, and so removing insecticides helps the bees fight against the mite. So it's all part of a big puzzle, and I think the less of those insecticides you can use, the better off for all insects.
Well, and that's actually key, and using the right amount of pesticides. If you're going to use pesticides, use the right amount. Use what the manufacturer recommends. As a homeowner, I might look at the instructions, and the instructions say, mix a cup, you need to mix an ounce with a gallon of water. But if the homeowner, if an ounce is good with a gallon of water, maybe 2 ounces is better.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 ounces might be really good. But on the other hand, that may be way too much for the bees and the other good insects that are going to counter this insecticide for them to be able to handle. So the manufacturer is giving you directions for a reason, and you can follow them. And if you follow those directions and you use it sparingly, you're a lot less likely to have a negative impact on the bees. And certainly, doubling with those, tripling with them, you're going to overtake the bees' ability to manage those terminations.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of non-toxic ways to kind of treat plants. Any organic farmer can tell you that. There's all kinds of tricks. Again, the internet has a lot of really good ones. So you should explore those. If you just absolutely have to use something, do it really late in the day, because the foragers all go back to bed, as the sun's going down, and at least it has overnight to kind of dissipate a little bit. So if the foragers get back on it in the morning, it's less toxic than if you did it first thing in the morning right when the bees are coming out. So there's strategies if you have to do it, but there's all kinds of other ways that you can treat without using toxins that are dangerous to the good insects. So.
Okay. My next question is kind of about the evolution, the projected evolution of the bees. and it involves their life cycle and the life cycle of the workers and the queen, and I guess the hive in general. What is that like?
Yeah, so 30, 40 years ago, before Varroa came over, people had queens that would live for 3, 4, 5, 6 years sometimes. The queen can live a long time because the royal jelly is like a fountain of youth, and it keeps her alive for a long time. Because of Varroa mainly, and probably insecticides too, 2 to 3 years is a really long time to have a queen in a colony. I've had a couple 3-year queens in my career, but 1 to 2 is probably more usual, and that's kind of a shame because they just won't live as long. The workers only live about 45 days during the summer. Winter bees live longer, but that's a different thing. And drones live about the same length of time. So one of the reasons the queen is laying all the time is to replace, all those bees that are dying, and to try to capitalize on the nectar flow. So one of the things that's stressful in the mid-Atlantic, which we're part of, is that we only get 1 nectar flow. Many parts of the country get at least 2, and some get 3 or 4. And so we get a nectar flow that starts sometime in May, and it depends on the year. This year it was kind of late in May because it was so kind of cold, and it kind of gets cold at night, pretty late into May. And it ends sometime right around now, end of June, maybe first week of July. And that doesn't mean there's no nectar, but it means that they can't bring in more than they need. And so they can't store extra. So whatever they have brought in by the end of June, now they're going to start consuming. So let's say they brought 60 pounds in by the end of June, now the weight's going to start dropping because as they continue to create brood, they have to feed it because they have to feed themselves. And they're bringing in stuff, but it's not keeping up. Now they're in a deficit. And so in most parts of the country, sometime in the fall, September, October timeframe, they'll get another nectar flow. Sometimes it's better than even the spring nectar flow. And that really sets the colonies up for the winter because they need about 60 pounds. The colony this side needs about 50 to 60 pounds to make it through the winter of honey. And so it's tough in the mid-Atlantic because we have that one shot, and if the weather gets weird and we don't get a lot of good nectar in, then the bees have a hard time trying to make it through the winter. This year was kind of in the middle. Wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. But last year wasn't very good, and so that again makes it difficult for the colonies to make it through. And it especially makes it difficult for those that swarm and might end up in a bee tree. We would all love to have a big oak tree with honeybees, in it. But the problem is we can't feed those bees because they're up in a tree. On this colony, if I go and evaluate this sometime in October or November and I decide, okay, there's only 25 pounds of spores on here and they need 50, then I can actually add sugar water to this and feed this colony and get it up to 50 pounds before the winter comes in. It's not the way I prefer to do it. I'd rather have them have honey, so I don't actually extract honey from my colonies, but most people do. And so they feed and then they get the colonies back up to weight. But in a tree, you can't do that. And it's one of the reasons that swarms are so vulnerable. Because if they get into a tree and the nectar flow is slowing down, like right now, they're not going to get 40 or 50 pounds of honey in that tree because it's not enough of a resource. So it's tricky in the wild, especially, just because the mid-Atlantic only get that one nectar flow. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your
welcome.
presentation. This is very informing, and I'd like to take us to the pollinator garden now. Would you guys like to come along?
Sure.
Welcome to our pollinator garden. We're going to give you a tour of what we have planted here, but by way of backstory, the way this garden came to be where it is that when we first came to the farm last year, we saw the milkweed was sprouting right in this area. And so this is a lovely milkweed plant, almost as tall as I am. And this is the host plant for the monarch butterfly, which is, in addition to honeybees and other forms of butterflies and moths, a really special pollinator. And so the butterflies lay their eggs on here, the caterpillars eat these leaves, And we'll have the chrysalis here too. So we wanted to protect the milkweed that was just here natively, and so we have created a pollinator garden around the presence of the milkweed. So that's how this came to be right here, but it's great because it's right next to our climate victory garden and several other gardens. It gives a kind of a diverse habitat for a variety of our pollinator friends right here. And one of the things we want to do for pollinator gardens is try to sort of create a focal area for pollinators to come and be able to find a variety of sources of nectar. So with that, I will turn it over to Chelsea and she can walk you through what we have in here. And we're going to plant a few new plants. Hi everyone. I'm going to walk you through our little cafe we have going here. Come on in. We of course have a lot of milkweed that you'll see popping up. There's butterfly weed, which tends to stay a little bit lower and it has the orange blooms. And then common milkweed has these pink blooms that you'll see, and they grow a little bit taller. This is buttonbush, which is the host of a couple different snakes moths. So hopefully we'll see those out soon, and we'll keep an eye out for the snake moth as well. Our path is being taken over by milkweed, which is fantastic. So we're just going to give them their space here as we walk through. We have boneset and Joe Pivy, which are also great for pollinators. They love the pollen on those. We have coneflower that's not quite in bloom yet, but it's working on it. This is the purple coneflower that you'll see. We have it in a few different places. And then here we have a brand new beautiful zinnia, which is the first one in our garden, and it's so bright and we're so happy to see it. We have, coming around the corner here, we have a lot of, I believe these are cosmos that are popping up also. And one thing that you want to keep in mind if you are planting a pollinator garden is to have a source of water. So for now we have this small, almost like a bird bath, and you'll see it has rocks in it, and that's so that the bees and the butterflies can land somewhere. They're not going to land actually in the water. They'll land on the edge or on the rocks to sip water. So we are going to keep an eye on that, make sure it's clean every day for the bees and the butterflies. Also, it's important that they have that in the pollinator garden as well. So around here, we have, let's see, a lot of zinnia popping up. We have more buttonbush, more milkweed. Let's see here. Lots of freebane, which is getting very tall over here. And I've noticed the little flies like this one a lot, but flies help with our pollination too. And coming around this corner, let's see. Yeah, so we have a lot more milkweed, that's for sure. I was counting the milkweed to try to give you a number, and I lost track of our milkweed. So when we got this spot last year, there was milkweed everywhere, and so this year, like Yara was saying, we're just trying to make sure they have the space that they need and keeping the weeds out, and making sure this is a great space for all the pollinators. Just starting with that milkweed base and adding everything else that hopefully the bees and the butterflies and the moths enjoy. You'll see lots of ladybugs in here, dragonflies. Every time you come, it's kind of, even today, it's kind of buzzing with action, which is really exciting to see. The bees especially, they really love the milkweed. So the milkweed is not even just for those monarchs, of course that's so important, but even the bumblebees are all over it, which is really exciting. Let's see. So,
And
yes,
what are these plants that you're preparing to place in here?
a butterfly weed right here, which is what you saw on the other side with the orange leaves. This is a mountain mint, and we have a cardinal flower that we planted. So we have a perfect spot right here. We have this clear. This will be a nice spot for these ones here. So you may notice you'll see cardboard kind of popping up in places, and that's why we ask for cardboard a lot because we use it in our as a weed barrier. So we try to lay down the cardboard over the weeds that we don't want and layer that with mulch. So you'll see cardboard here and there, but it's really helping in the weeds. We don't want to spray anything here in the pollinator garden because it's not good for anybody. So that's one natural way that we try to keep the weeds away, and just lots of food. milkweed is just going to pop up where it wants to. It's been doing that a lot. But we've noticed, I mean, the cardboard doesn't stop it. It comes right through. I'm going to leave this little label in. You'll see we've been trying to label things in the garden. Just so, I mean, it's helpful for me to remember what's in here, but also for people that come and visit just to see if they want to replicate it at their own homes. So kind of know what some good sources